The distress call came in at 2:47 hours, broken and desperate, cutting through the static like a scream through fog. Forward Operating Base Garrick sat in the Hindu Kush Mountains, 11 kilometers from the Pakistani border, and the voice on the other end belonged to Lieutenant Voss, 3rd Platoon Leader, whose convoy had been ambushed in the Korangal Valley. 8 vehicles, 43 soldiers. Surrounded on 3 sides by insurgent fire from elevated positions, pinned down in a killbox with no cover and dwindling ammunition. The quick reaction force scrambled immediately, but everyone in the operations center knew the math. Ground reinforcements were 30 minutes out. The platoon had maybe 10. Colonel Hendricks stood at the tactical display, his jaw working like he was chewing gravel, eyes fixed on the red icons pulsing on the screen. Behind him, Major Talbot was already on the radio to Bagram, requesting immediate close air support, his voice clipped and urgent. The response came back within 90 seconds. One asset available. Call St. Hatchet 11, Captain Rook McGuire, flying an A-10 Thunderbolt II out of Kandahar, already airborne on a different tasking, now being diverted northeast. ETA 14 minutes. Hendricks felt his chest tight. 14 minutes was a lifetime in a firefight. He glanced at the combat camera feed streaming from helmet cams in the valley. Muzzle flashes in the dark, shadows moving along ridgelines, tracer rounds arcing down into the convoy like falling stars. Voss was shouting coordinates over the radio now, his words punctuated by the staccato crack of AK fire in the background. Talbot scribbled notes, then keyed the mic to relay targeting information to the inbound A-10. There was a pause, then a voice came back. Calm, almost casual, female. Hatchet 11 copies all. 14 mics out, hold tight down there. Hendricks blinked. Talbot stiffened. Across the operations center, heads turned. Captain McGuire. The name was familiar, but the voice threw them. A woman, flying the Warthog, at night. Into a hot valley with no moon and enemy positions dug into high ground. Talbot exchanged a glance with Hendricks. The colonel's expression was unreadable, but his fingers drummed once against the edge of the table. "Confirm Hatchet 11 is our only air," Hendricks asked quietly. "Affirmative, sir," Talbot replied. "Next available CAS is 40 minutes out. Apache flight refueling at Jalalabad." Hendricks nodded slowly. He didn't say what everyone else was thinking, that this wasn't the kind of mission you handed off to someone flying solo, that the A-10 was a daytime ground pounder, not a precision night striker. That Captain McGuire, whoever she was, had just inherited a nearly impossible task. Down in the valley, Voss was still calling for help. And somewhere in the black Afghan sky, an A-10 Thunderbolt was boring northeast at 300 knots, alone. Captain Rook McGuire sat in the cockpit of her A-10, surrounded by darkness and the low hum of twin turbofans. The instrument panel glowed green and amber in front of her, casting faint light across her gloved hands and the edges of her helmet. Outside, there was nothing. No horizon, no stars, just the vast emptiness of a moonless night over Afghanistan, the kind of dark that swallowed everything and gave nothing back. She banked gently northeast, feeling the Warthog respond with its usual blunt grace, heavy and deliberate, like a sledgehammer with wings. The A-10 wasn't built for elegance. It was built to take punishment and deliver hell, a flying tank designed around a 30mm rotary cannon that could shred armor and evaporate infantry positions. But at night, over mountains, with no visual references and a ground team bleeding out in a valley, elegance didn't matter. Precision did. Rook scanned her heads-up display, checking altitude, airspeed, bearing. She was at 12,000 feet, threading between peaks she couldn't see, relying on terrain mapping radar and muscle memory. Her left hand rested on the throttle. Her right hovered near the stick. She keyed the radio. "Garrick Actual, Hatchet 11, 12 mics out. Request updated sitrep and target coordinates." The response came immediately. Major Talbot's voice, crisp and controlled. "Hatchet 11, Garrick Actual. Friendlies pinned in grid November Kilo 7342. 8 vehicles in column formation, east-west orientation along Route Indigo. Enemy fire from ridgelines north, west, and south. Estimated 50 to 70 hostiles. Danger close situation. Friendlies are marked with infrared strobes." Rook copied the coordinates into her system, her fingers moving across the panel with practiced efficiency. Copy danger close. Confirm friendlies have IR strobes active and are buttoned up. Affirmative. Third platoon is taking cover inside vehicles. Strobes active. Be advised enemy has possible MANPADS in the area. Rook's jaw tightened. Man-portable air defense systems. Shoulder-fired missiles. The A-10 was tough, redundant, armored, but a heat seeker up the tailpipe would still ruin her day. She adjusted her flight path slightly, planning her approach to minimize exposure time in the target area. Hatchet 11 copies MANPADS threat. Will assess on arrival. She released the mic and exhaled slowly. Her call sign Hatchet had been given to her 3 years ago during her first deployment, not because she was reckless, not because she was brutal, but because when things went sideways, when the mission turned ugly and the options ran out, Rook McGuire was the one who stayed calm and made the cut. Clean, decisive, final. The nickname stuck. Some pilots wore their call signs like medals. Rook wore hers like a scar. She checked her weapon status. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon was loaded with 1,100 rounds of 30mm depleted uranium, Hydra rockets under the wings, Maverick missiles on the outboard pylons, everything green, everything ready. But she wasn't thinking about the ordnance. She was thinking about the soldiers on the ground. Rook had been those soldiers once. 7 years ago, before flight school, before the A-10, she'd been a convoy gunner in Helmand Province, riding in the back of an MRAP with a 50 cal and a prayer. She remembered what it felt like to be pinned down, to hear the snap of bullets overhead, to taste dust and cordite in fear. She remembered the desperate hope that came with the sound of jet engines in the distance, the way your chest unclenched when you knew air support was inbound. She also remembered the times when it didn't come, when the radio went silent, when you realized you were alone. She wasn't going to let that happen tonight. The A-10 carved through the darkness, descending now, dropping to 8,000 feet as the valley ahead began to take shape on her sensors. She switched her night vision system online, and the world outside shifted into a grainy green tableau of ridges and slopes. She could see the faint heat signatures of the convoy vehicles now, tiny bright spots clustered together in the valley floor. Around them, scattered across the high ground, were dozens of other signatures, smaller, moving, firing. Rook's hand moved to the cannon trigger, her thumb resting lightly on the safety. Not yet. She needed to get closer, needed to see the geometry of the battlefield, understand the layout, identify the greatest threat. The radio crackled again. This time it wasn't Talbot. It was Voss, the platoon leader on the ground, his voice ragged and strained. Any station, this is Bonecrusher 3-6. We are taking heavy casualties. Request immediate air support. How copy? Rook keyed her mic instantly. Bonecrusher 3-6, Hatchet 1-1, I'm 6 mics out, hang on. There was a pause, then Voss again, disbelief threading through his words. Hatchet, you're solo? Affirmative. Another pause, longer this time. Rook could hear the firefight in the background, the dull thump of grenades, the metallic chatter of machine guns. When Voss spoke again, his voice was quieter. Copy that, Hatchet, we're glad you're here. Rook didn't respond. She didn't need to. She just kept flying, her eyes locked on the target area ahead, her mind already running through the attack profile. The valley was tight. The enemy was dug in. The friendlies were surrounded. It was a textbook nightmare scenario, the kind that ended careers or lives depending on how the next few minutes played out. But Rook had flown worse. She'd survived worse. And tonight in the darkness over the Quarangle she was going to prove it. Again. The A-10 roared on, alone against the night. At Fob Garrick, the operations center had gone quiet. Officers and NCOs stood motionless around the glowing tactical display, their faces illuminated by the pale light of computer screens and overhead fluorescents. On the main monitor, the live feed from 3rd Platoon's helmet cameras showed chaos. Muzzle flashes, smoke, shadows darting between rocks. The audio feed was worse. Shouting, explosions, the wet, rattling cough of a wounded soldier somewhere off-screen. Colonel Hendricks stood with his arms crossed, his expression carved from granite. Beside him, Major Talbot held the radio handset, his knuckles white. They were listening to Hatchet 11's approach, tracking her progress on the radar overlay, watching the green icon creep closer to the red swarm of enemy contacts. "She's coming in from the northeast," Talbot muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Low and fast, smart. Keeps her out of the western ridgeline's line of fire." Hendricks grunted. "Until she has to turn." Talbot said nothing. He knew what the colonel meant. The A-10 was slow by jet standards, especially when it was carrying a full combat load. Once McGuire committed to her attack run, she'd be vulnerable, exposed. A fat, lumbering target for anyone with a rifle and the discipline to lead their shots. And if the MANPADS report was accurate, she'd be flying into a potential missile envelope with no wingman, no decoys, no margin for error. Across the room, a young intelligence analyst named Corporal Dietrich leaned toward his supervisor, keeping his voice low. "Sir, do we know anything about this pilot, McGuire?" The supervisor, a grizzled warrant officer named Lang, glanced at his screen and scrolled through a database entry. "Captain Rook McGuire, 31, former enlisted, did a tour as a gunner before commissioning. Flight school graduate, top 15%, 3 deployments, 240 combat hours in the A-10. No incidents, no washouts, clean record," Dietrich frowned. "She flying solo by choice or necessity?" Lang shrugged. "Does it matter?" It didn't, not really. But the question hung in the air anyway, unspoken but shared by everyone in the room. Why was she alone? Why wasn't there a 2-ship flight? Why had command sent a single A-10 into this mess? The answer, of course, was simple. Because she was the only asset available. Because war didn't wait for perfect conditions. Because sometimes you rolled the dice and hoped. Hendricks checked his watch. 4 minutes until Hatchet 11 reached the target area. He looked at Talbot. "Get me Voss. I want to know his exact position and confirm those IR strobes are visible." Talbot nodded and switched frequencies, calling down to the platoon leader. The response was immediate but barely audible over the noise of the firefight. Voss confirmed the strobes, confirmed the enemy positions, confirmed that his people were running out of time. Down in the valley, Lieutenant Voss crouched behind the rear axle of his MRAP, his rifle pressed against his shoulder, his breathing shallow and fast. Around him, his platoon was disintegrating. Sergeant Klein was down, bleeding from a leg wound, dragged into cover by 2 privates who were now pinned beside him. Specialist Ruiz was on the 50 cal, hammering outbursts toward the northern ridge, but the enemy fire wasn't slowing. It was intensifying. Voss could see them now, silhouettes moving along the high ground, advancing slowly, methodically, tightening the noose. He ducked as a burst of automatic fire stitched across the hood of the MRAP, sparks flying, metal screaming. His radio operator, Private Chen, was shouting something, but Voss couldn't hear over the noise. He turned, saw Chen pointing upward, and then he heard it. A sound like distant thunder, low, rumbling, growing louder. The A-10. Voss felt something unclench in his chest. He keyed his radio, his voice hoarse. "Hatchet 11, Bonecrusher 36. We have visual on your position. You're coming from our northeast. Hostiles are on ridgelines to our north, west, and south. Closest threats are north, about 200 meters up the slope." Rook's voice came back, steady and calm. "Bonecrusher, Hatchet, I have your strobes. Confirm you are inside vehicles and buttoned up." Firm, Voss started, but an explosion cut him off, a rocket-propelled grenade detonating against the side of the lead truck, sending a plume of fire into the air. He dropped flat, ears ringing, and when he looked up, he saw flames spreading across the engine block. "Hatchet, we just lost our lead vehicle. We need you now." 30 seconds, Rook replied. And then the night changed. The A-10 appeared out of the darkness like a phantom, low and fast, its silhouette barely visible against the black sky. But Voss could hear it. That unmistakable sound, the twin turbofans screaming, the heavy weight of the aircraft pressing down on the air itself. It was a sound that meant salvation. The Warthog banked hard, lining up on the northern ridgeline, and then the world exploded. The GAU-8 Avenger opened up, and it was like the hand of God reaching down to smite the earth. The cannon roared, a deep, guttural brrrrrt that reverberated through the valley, and the ridgeline erupted in a line of fire and destruction. 30-millimeter rounds tore through rock and flesh and metal, each one the size of a milk bottle, traveling at nearly a kilometer per second. Insurgents vanished in clouds of dust and shrapnel. Positions disintegrated. Voss watched, awestruck, as the A-10 pulled up and away, climbing into the darkness, and for a moment the enemy fire slackened. Just a moment, but it was enough to breathe. Rook pulled the A-10 into a climbing left turn, her muscles straining against the G-forces, the Warthog groaning as it clawed for altitude. She leveled out at 7,500 feet, scanning her instruments, checking her position. The first gun run had been clean. She'd walked the cannon fire along the northern ridge, targeting the heaviest concentrations of muzzle flashes, and the infrared overlay on her targeting system showed multiple heat signatures winking out. Hits. Confirmed kills. But she wasn't done. Not even close. She banked again, bringing the A-10 around for another pass, this time targeting the western ridgeline. The enemy there had started to reposition, trying to flank the convoy from a different angle, and Rook could see their movement on her sensors. She adjusted her approach, coming in from the south this time, keeping the high ground between herself and the suspected MANPADS position. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. Throttle back. Nose down, target acquisition. Lock. The Hydra rockets rippled off her wings in pairs, streaking down into the darkness like angry meteors. They impacted along the western ridge in a series of sharp, bright explosions, each one blooming orange and red against the black landscape. Secondary explosions followed, ammunition cooking off, fuel igniting. Rook watched the thermal bloom spread across her display and allowed herself a tight, satisfied nod. The radio crackled. Voss again, his voice stronger now, edged with something that might have been hope. Hatchet Bonecrusher, that's good hits on the west side. We're starting to get some breathing room. South Ridge is still active, though. Heavy machine gun position about 300 meters south-southwest of our location. Rook copied the information, already adjusting her flight path. Bonecrusher Hatchet, I see it. Stand by. She came around again, slower this time, descending to 5,000 feet. The A-10 was at its best when it was low, when it could leverage its armor and its redundancy, when it could get close enough to see the whites of their eyes. Not that she could see anything tonight, just green ghosts on a screen, but she could feel them. Could sense the geometry of the battlefield, the way the enemy was moving, the way they were reacting to her presence. They were scared now. Good. Fear made people stupid, made them run, made them expose themselves. Rook lined up on the southern ridge, brought the cannon to bear, and fired again. The BRRRRT echoed through the valley and the ridgeline came apart. Rocks shattered, dirt geysered into the air. The machine gun position went silent. She pulled up, rolled out, checked her fuel, still good. Ordnance remaining, plenty, no warning lights, no alarms. The A-10 was doing what it did best, taking punishment, delivering more. Back at Fob Garrick, the operations center had erupted in controlled chaos. Officers were calling out updates, tracking Hatchet 11's position, relaying information to higher command. On the main screen, the thermal overlay showed the battlefield transforming. Enemy contacts dropping off the display, friendly positions stabilizing. The convoy, moments ago on the brink of annihilation, was now holding. Major Talbot stood at the center of it all, the radio handset pressed to his ear, his eyes locked on the display. Beside him, Colonel Hendricks watched in silence, his jaw tight, his hands clasped behind his back. "She's shredding them," Talbot muttered, almost to himself. Hendricks didn't respond, but his eyes never left the screen. He'd seen close air support before, seen it done well and seen it done poorly. But this was something different. This wasn't just competent flying. This was surgical. Methodical, like watching a chess master dismantle an opponent piece by piece. Across the room, Corporal Dietrich turned to Warrant Officer Lang, his voice quiet but urgent. "How is she doing this? At night? Solo?" Lang shook his head slowly. "I don't know, kid, I really don't. But someone else did." At the back of the operations center, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, was Chief Warrant Officer 5 Samuel Pike, a helicopter pilot with 30 years of service and more combat hours than anyone else in the room. He'd been watching McGuire's attack runs in silence, his weathered face betraying nothing. Now, as the junior officers marveled at the A-10's performance, Pike spoke up, his voice gravelly and low. "She's using terrain masking, coming in from different vectors every time. staying unpredictable, and she's not just dropping ordnance. She's reading the battlefield, watching how they move, where they cluster. She's hunting. Talbot glanced over his shoulder. You know her? Pike shrugged. Know of her. McGuire's got a reputation, quiet, doesn't talk much, but when the flag goes up, she's the one you want in the stack. Hendricks turned, his expression unreadable. What kind of reputation? Pike met the colonel's gaze evenly. The kind that gets people home alive. The room fell silent. On the screen, the A-10 was making another pass and the valley lit up with fire. In the cockpit, Rook was breathing steadily, her focus absolute. She just expended another volley of rockets, and now she was circling back, assessing the damage, looking for survivors, for threats, for anything that might still pose a danger to the convoy below. The enemy was breaking. She could see it in the way they moved, scattered and disorganized, their formations collapsing, their fire becoming sporadic and wild. They hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected sustained, accurate air support in the middle of the night. Hadn't expected Hatchet. Rook keyed her radio, her voice calm. Bonecrusher 3-6, Hatchet 1-1, enemy activity is decreasing. What's your status? Voss responded immediately, his voice tight but controlled. Hatchet Bonecrusher, we're stable for now. Casualties are being treated, no further vehicle losses. You've given us room to maneuver. Copy, I'm going to make one more pass, then orbit overhead while you consolidate. QRF should be arriving soon. Roger that, and Hatchet, thank you. Rook didn't answer. She just adjusted her throttle and brought the A-10 around for another circuit, her eyes scanning the ridgelines, looking for movement, for heat signatures, for any sign that the fight wasn't over. Because it was never over until you were wheels up and heading home. She'd learned that the hard way. The hard way was the only way that stuck. She thought about the convoy below, about the soldiers huddled inside their vehicles, wounded and exhausted and terrified. She thought about Voss, trying to hold his platoon together while the world came apart around him. She thought about the young private who'd probably never been in a firefight before tonight, who was now crouched in the dark with a rifle and a prayer, wondering if he'd see the sunrise. She'd been that private once, and someone had pulled her out. Now it was her turn. The A-10 descended again, and Rook brought the cannon to bear one last time, targeting a cluster of heat signatures that were trying to regroup on the eastern slope. The GAU-8 roared and the slope exploded. When the dust settled, there was nothing left but silence. Voss's voice came over the radio, shaky but relieved. Hatchet Bonecrusher, that's all of them. I think that's all of them. Rook pulled up, leveling off at 6,000 feet, and began a slow orbit over the valley. Below, the convoy was moving, repositioning, the soldiers emerging from cover to tend to the wounded and secure the perimeter. The QRF would be there in minutes. The crisis was over. She allowed herself a slow breath, her first in what felt like hours. Her hands were steady on the controls. Her pulse was calm. The A-10 droned on, circling like a guardian angel, and for the first time that night, Rook let herself feel the weight of what had just happened. She'd saved them, all of them, alone. In the dark, against impossible odds, she didn't feel pride. She felt relief, and exhaustion, and something else. Something she couldn't quite name. Duty, maybe, or purpose. Or just the quiet knowledge that she'd done what she was supposed to do. Nothing more, nothing less. The quick reaction force arrived 18 minutes later, a column of armored vehicles rolling into the valley with headlights blazing and gunners scanning the ridges. They found 3rd Platoon still in defensive positions, battered and bloody but alive. Lieutenant Voss met the QRF commander, a hard-faced captain named Brecht, and gave him a quick sitrep. 8 KIA enemy confirmed. No friendly KIA. 4 wounded, 2 critical. The convoy had taken significant damage, but it was mobile. Brecht listened, nodded, then looked up at the sky. Where's your air support? Voss pointed upward. Still here, Hatchet 1-1. She's been orbiting for the last 20 minutes. Brecht frowned. She, one pilot. Yeah, Brecht didn't say anything, but his expression shifted slightly, something between surprise and respect. He keyed his own radio, calling up to the A-10. Hatchet 1-1, this is Sledgehammer 6. We have control of the ground. You're cleared to RTB. We've got it from here. Rook's voice came back, calm as ever. Sledgehammer, Hatchet, copy RTB, good hunting. And then the sound of the turbofans began to fade, the A-10 climbing and banking south, disappearing into the night as quietly as it had arrived. Voss watched it go, his chest tight. Beside him, Sergeant Klein, bandaged and pale, leaned against the side of an MRAP. "Hell of a pilot," Klein muttered. Voss nodded. "Yeah, hell of a pilot." But what he didn't say, what he couldn't quite put into words, was how it had felt to hear that voice on the radio. Calm, steady, unshakable, like an anchor in a storm. He'd expected a gunship, a pair of F-16s, something loud and overwhelming. Instead, he'd gotten one warthog and one pilot, and it had been enough. More than enough. Back at Kandahar, Rook brought the A-10 in for landing just before dawn, the sky beginning to lighten in the east, the mountains turning from black to purple to gold. She taxied to her hardstand, shut down the engines, and sat in the cockpit for a moment, her hands still resting on the controls, her body heavy with exhaustion. The ground crew was already approaching, ready to refuel and rearm, but she didn't move. She just sat there, breathing, letting the silence wash over her. When she finally climbed down from the cockpit, the crew chief, a staff sergeant named Ortiz, was waiting for her. He looked at the A-10, checking for damage, and whistled low. "You take any hits, ma'am?" Rook shook her head. "Clean flight," Ortiz grinned. "Good, because we heard what you did out there. Word's already spreading. They're calling it the Corangle Run." Rook pulled off her helmet, her dark hair damp with sweat. "It wasn't anything special." Ortiz's grin faded, replaced by something more serious. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's bullshit. You saved 43 soldiers tonight, solo, in the dark. That's not nothing." Rook looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Just doing the job, Sergeant." She walked away, heading toward the debrief building, her flight suit sticking to her back, her legs stiff and sore. Behind her, the A-10 sat on the tarmac, scarred and ugly and beautiful, a monument to controlled violence and stubborn endurance. The debrief took 2 hours. Rook sat in a small, windowless room with 2 intelligence officers and a recording device, walking them through every detail of the mission: approach vector, ordnance expenditure, target assessment, enemy behavior, fuel management, threat response. They asked questions, she answered. Her voice was flat, clinical, stripped of emotion, just the facts, just the mission. When it was over, they thanked her and told her she'd flown a textbook operation. She nodded, stood, and left. Outside, the sun was fully up now, the base coming to life around her. Helicopters lifting off, crews shouting, the smell of jet fuel and dust and breakfast cooking somewhere in the distance. Rook walked across the tarmac toward her quarters, her mind already shifting to the next thing: sleep, food, maintenance reports. Another mission tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that. But she didn't get far. A voice called out behind her. "Captain McGuire," she turned. A lieutenant colonel she didn't recognize was approaching, flanked by a major. Both looked freshly pressed, their uniforms crisp, their expressions serious. The lieutenant colonel stopped in front of her and extended his hand. "Colonel Rains, Bagram Air Operations. I wanted to shake your hand personally." Rook shook it, her grip firm but brief. "Sir," Rains smiled. "Hell of a job last night. I've been reviewing the gun camera footage and the after-action reports. What you did out there, it's going in the training manuals." Rook shifted her weight, uncomfortable with the attention. "Just followed procedure, sir. Procedure doesn't account for what you pulled off," Rains said. "Solo nighttime CAS in a mountain valley with no moon and MANPADS threats. That's not procedure, that's skill and guts." The major beside him nodded. "We're recommending you for a decoration, probably a Distinguished Flying Cross." Rook's jaw tightened. "That's not necessary, sir." Rains raised an eyebrow. "Not necessary? Captain, you saved an entire platoon. That's exactly what medals are for." "With respect, sir, I was doing my job. The real heroes are the guys on the ground. Lieutenant Voss and his platoon. They're the ones who held the line." Rains studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You don't like the spotlight, do you?" Rook met his gaze evenly. "I like flying, sir, that's all." Rains smiled again, this time with something like understanding. "Fair enough. But the spotlight's coming whether you like it or not. Word's already spreading. You're going to be famous, Captain." Rook said nothing. She just nodded once, saluted, and walked away. Behind her, Rains watched her go, shaking his head slowly. "Quiet one," the major murmured. "Yeah," Rains agreed. "But she gets the job done." Over the next few days, the story spread. It started in the operations centers, passed along in radio chatter and shift briefings. Then it moved to the chow halls, where soldiers swapped rumors and exaggerations over trays of lukewarm food. Then it hit the email chains, the unofficial networks that connected forward bases to rear echelons, and from there it went viral. The night the A-10 saved 3rd Platoon, the Korangal run, the solo gun run that changed everything. Details got embellished. Some said Rook had flown through a hailstorm of gunfire without taking a single hit. Others claimed she'd made 7 attack runs, not 4. A few insisted she'd taken out over 100 insurgents. The truth, as always, was more modest. 4 runs, 37 confirmed enemy KIA, no damage to the aircraft, but the truth didn't matter as much as the story. And the story was simple. 1 pilot, one impossible mission. Success. At Fob Garrick, Lieutenant Voss became something of a celebrity himself, fielding questions from reporters embedded with the unit, giving interviews for Stars and Stripes and Armed Forces Network. He told the story the same way every time, never embellishing, never exaggerating, just the facts. But when they asked him about Captain Maguire, his voice changed, became quieter, more reverent. "She saved us," he said simply. "We were done, dead, and she flew into hell and pulled us out. I don't care what anyone says, she's a hero." The quote made it into a dozen articles, 100 blog posts. It circled the internet, shared and reshared, liked and retweeted until Rook's name became shorthand for competence under pressure. At Kandahar, Rook ignored all of it. She flew her missions, logged her hours, filed her reports. She ate alone, slept in her bunk, and spent her downtime in the hangar, helping the crew chiefs with maintenance. She didn't give interviews, didn't pose for photos, didn't attend the ceremony when Colonel Rains tried to pin the DFC on her chest. She sent her apologies, said she was mission critical, said she couldn't spare the time. Rains didn't push, he understood. Some people needed the recognition, others just needed to fly. But the story didn't stop. It kept growing, kept spreading, until it reached the Pentagon, where a 2-star general read the after-action report and passed it up the chain with a handwritten note. "This is the kind of airmanship we need more of." And from there, it reached the Air Force Chief of Staff, who mentioned it in a speech about the importance of close air support and the pilots who made it happen. And from there, it reached the news. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all of them ran versions of the same story, complete with stock footage of A-10s and interviews with military analysts who praised Rook's flying and speculated about her training, her background, her mindset. None of them knew her. None of them had spoken to her, but that didn't stop them from talking. Rook found out about the media coverage from Ortiz, who showed her a clip on his phone during a post-flight inspection. She watched 30 seconds of it, her face expressionless, then handed the phone back. "Turn it off," Ortiz hesitated. "Ma'am, they're calling you a hero. I don't care what they're calling me." "But Sergeant," Rook said quietly, "I appreciate the sentiment, but I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because it needed to be done. And I'd do it again tomorrow without a second thought. That's the job, that's all it is." Ortiz studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Understood, ma'am." Rook turned back to the A-10, running her hand along the fuselage, checking for stress fractures, for signs of fatigue. The Warthog was old, ugly, unloved by everyone except the people who flew it and the people it saved. It was slow, it was loud, it was obsolete by modern standards, but it worked. It endured, it came home. Ortiz watched her, then spoke again, his voice softer. "For what it's worth, ma'am, the crew thinks you're the real deal. Best stick we've seen in a long time." Rook glanced at him, her expression softening just slightly. "Thanks, Sergeant, but the real heroes are the guys on the ground, don't forget that." "I won't, ma'am." Rook nodded and went back to her inspection. The sun was setting now, the sky turning orange and purple, the mountains casting long shadows across the base. Somewhere in the distance, an F-16 was taking off, its afterburners roaring, a streak of fire against the twilight. Rook watched it climb, watched it disappear into the clouds, and felt nothing. No envy, no longing, just quiet satisfaction. She didn't need to be fast. She didn't need to be flashy. She just needed to be there when it mattered. And she always was. That night, alone in her bunk, Rook lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the mission. Not the explosions or the gunfire or the adrenaline, but the voices. Voss calling for help, The desperation in his tone, the relief when she'd answered, the gratitude when it was over. She thought about the 43 soldiers who were alive because she'd been in the right place at the right time. She thought about the families who would get to see their sons and daughters and husbands and wives again. She thought about the weight of that responsibility, the knowledge that one mistake, one miscalculation, one moment of hesitation could have changed everything. And she thought about the next mission, because there was always a next mission, always another convoy, another firefight, another desperate call in the dark, and she would answer. She always did. 3 weeks later, Rook was reassigned, not because of the Korangal run, not because of the media attention, but because the Air Force needed experienced A-10 pilots at a different base and her rotation was up. She packed her gear, said goodbye to Ortiz and the crew, and climbed into a C-130 bound for Germany. The transition was smooth. She reported to Spangdahlem Air Base, checked in with her new squadron commander, and was flying again within 48 hours. Training missions. Readiness exercises. The occasional deployment to Eastern Europe where tensions with Russia kept everyone on edge. It was different from Afghanistan, cleaner, more structured, less chaotic, but the fundamentals were the same. Fly the mission, bring the jet home, repeat. Her new squadron, the 81st Fighter Squadron, welcomed her quietly. They knew about the Korangal run. Everyone did, but they didn't make a big deal out of it, didn't ask for autographs or war stories. They just treated her like another pilot, which was exactly what she wanted, but not everyone saw her that way. Captain Jace Holloway, a hotshot F-16 pilot who shared the same briefing room, made it clear from day one that he thought the A-10 was a relic. "No offense, McGuire," he said one afternoon during a joint briefing, "but the Hog is done. It's slow, it's vulnerable, and it's got no place in modern warfare. You should transfer to Vipers, faster, smarter, more survivable." Rook looked at him, her expression neutral. "The A-10 does a job that needs doing, close air support, saving lives, that's not going away." Holloway smirked. "Sure, but you can do CAS in an F-16 too, with precision-guided munitions, from altitude, without exposing yourself to ground fire." "You can," Rook agreed. "But the A-10 can do it better, closer, with more endurance. And when the weather's bad and the visibility's zero and the friendlies are danger close, the Hog is what you want overhead, not a fast mover that's gone in 30 seconds. Holloway leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "You're living in the past, McGuire." Rook didn't answer. She just gathered her notes and walked out. Behind her, another pilot, Major Kellen Cross, watched the exchange with quiet interest. Cross was older, a veteran of the First Gulf War, and he'd flown A-10s himself before transitioning to a staff role. He waited until Holloway left, then caught up with Rook in the hallway. "Don't let him get to you," Cross said. "He's young, doesn't know what he doesn't know." Rook shrugged. "Doesn't bother me," Cross smiled. "I read the after-action from Korangal, what you did out there. That's the kind of flying people write books about." "It was just a mission, sir." "Maybe. But it was a hell of a mission, and it reminded a lot of people why the A-10 still matters." Rook glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Does it matter?" Cross's smile faded. "More than you think, Captain, more than you think." The question stayed with Rook, not because she doubted herself, but because she'd started to notice the way people looked at the A-10. The way budget discussions always circled back to retiring the fleet. The way newer, shinier aircraft got the headlines and the funding while the Warthog sat in the corner, old and scarred and unloved. It wasn't just Holloway, it was the institution. The A-10 had been slated for retirement a dozen times over the past 2 decades, saved only by the fact that it kept proving itself indispensable in combat. But how long could that last? How long before someone in Washington decided that precision-guided munitions and drones were good enough? How long before the Hog was finally put out to pasture? Rook didn't know, and she wasn't sure she wanted to find out. But she kept flying, kept training, kept hunting her skills. Because as long as there were soldiers on the ground who needed help, as long as there were convoys and patrols and forward positions that could come under fire, the A-10 had a purpose. And so did she. One evening she was sitting in the squadron bar, nursing a beer and reviewing flight logs when Major Cross sat down across from her. "Mind if I join you?" Rook gestured to the chair. "It's a free country, sir," Cross smiled. You know, you're the quietest pilot I've ever met. Most of them can't stop talking about themselves. Not much to say. I doubt that. Cross ordered a drink, then leaned back. Can I ask you something? Rook looked up. Sure. Why'd you choose the A-10? You could have flown anything. Vipers, eagles, raptors. Why the hog? Rook was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the condensation on her beer bottle. Because it matters. The A-10 doesn't do glamorous missions. It doesn't break speed records or win air-to-air fights, but it saves lives. And that's what I wanted to do, Cross nodded slowly. Because you used to be on the ground. Yeah, and someone pulled you out. Yeah, Cross didn't push. He just sipped his drink and let the silence settle. After a while, Rook spoke again, her voice quieter. I was in a convoy outside Sangin 7 years ago. We got hit by an IED, then ambushed. 3 vehicles destroyed, 12 casualties. We were pinned down for 40 minutes and I thought we were done. Then an A-10 showed up. Just one. Pilot made 6 gun runs, took out the ambush, stayed overhead until the QRF arrived. I never found out his name, never got to thank him, but I swore that if I ever got the chance, I'd do the same thing for someone else. Cross studied her, his expression thoughtful. And that's what you did in Koringal. That's what I try to do every time I fly. Cross raised his glass. To the hog and the people who fly it. Rook clinked her bottle against his glass. To the hog. Months passed. Rook flew missions across Europe, participated in NATO exercises, trained with Allied air forces. She became known as a reliable, no-nonsense pilot who didn't waste time or words. Her reputation grew quietly, built not on headlines but on the respect of the people who flew with her. And then in the spring the call came. A new deployment, back to the Middle East. Not Afghanistan this time, Syria. The mission was different. The enemy was different. But the fundamentals were the same. Provide close air support, protect the troops on the ground, bring the jet home. Rook packed her gear, said her goodbyes, and boarded the transport. She didn't think about the media coverage or the medals or the speeches. She thought about the mission and the soldiers who would be counting on her. When she arrived at the forward operating base, she was greeted by the squadron commander, a lieutenant colonel named Garrett, who shook her hand and smiled. Captain Maguire. Heard a lot about you. Welcome to the fight. Rook nodded. Thank you, sir. Ready to get to work. Garrett's smile widened. I like that. No drama, just results. You're going to fit in fine here. He wasn't wrong. Within a week, Rook was flying combat missions again, providing overwatch for special operations teams, hitting ISIS positions, clearing routes for convoys. The work was hard, the hours long, but she thrived in it. This was what she was built for. One night after a particularly grueling mission, she was walking back to her quarters when she heard someone call her name. She turned. A young airman, maybe 19 or 20, was jogging toward her, his face flushed with excitement. Captain Maguire, I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say, you're kind of a legend around here. The Koringal run, everyone knows about it. Rook sighed inwardly. It was just a mission. Maybe to you, but to us, to the guys on the ground. It's proof that someone's got our backs, that the Air Force isn't just about dropping bombs from 30,000 feet, that there are still pilots who get down in the dirt with us. Rook looked at him, her expression softening. What's your name, Airman? Kowalski, ma'am, Airman First Class. You been downrange before, Kowalski? No, ma'am, this is my first deployment. Rook nodded. Then let me tell you something. The people who have your back aren't just the pilots, it's the crew chiefs, the maintainers. The logistics folks, the intel analysts, the medics, every single person on this base is part of the team, and we're all here for the same reason, to get you home safe. Remember that. Kowalski straightened, his expression serious. Yes, ma'am, I will. Rook nodded once, then walked away. Behind her, Kowalski watched her go, something like awe in his eyes. The missions continued, day after day, week after week. Rook flew into dusty skis and over broken cities, her A-10 a steady presence above the chaos below. She didn't count her sorties, didn't keep track of her kills, she just flew. And every time she came back, Ortiz or one of the other crew chiefs would be waiting, ready to turn the jet around, to patch it up, to send it back out. The A-10 took hits, small arms fire, a few lucky RPG near misses. Shrapnel from a surface-to-air missile that detonated too far away to do real damage. But the hog kept flying, kept fighting, kept coming home, just like Rook. One afternoon, after a mission that had gone longer than expected, Rook landed with her fuel gauge reading near empty. She taxied to the hardstand, shut down, and climbed out to find Ortiz shaking his head. "Cutting it close, ma'am." Rook pulled off her helmet. "Had to make one more pass. Ground team needed it." Ortiz inspected the aircraft, running his hands over the fuselage, checking for damage. He found a line of bullet holes along the left wing, small caliber rounds that had punched through the skin but missed anything critical. "You're lucky," he said. "Could have been worse." Rook looked at the holes, then shrugged. "Could have been better too, but the jet's still flying." Ortiz grinned. "That's the hog for you, ugliest, toughest bird in the Air Force." "Damn right." They worked together in silence for a while, Ortiz patching the holes while Rook filled out the maintenance forms. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the base, and the air was cooling, a brief respite from the desert heat. When they were done, Ortiz stepped back and wiped his hands on a rag. "You know, ma'am, I've worked on a lot of aircraft. Vipers, Eagles, even a few B-1s, but the A-10, it's different, it's got a soul, you can feel it." Rook nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know what you mean. And the pilots who fly it, they're different too. You don't fly the hog because you want glory, you fly it because you give a damn." Rook didn't respond. She just looked at the aircraft, at the scars and the patches and the worn paint, and felt a quiet pride. This jet had saved lives, had brought soldiers home, had earned every scar, and so had she. That night, lying in her bunk, Rook thought about the mission, about the ground team she'd supported, the enemy positions she'd destroyed, the lives she'd saved. She thought about Voss and 3rd Platoon, about the Korangal Run, about all the missions before and all the missions yet to come. And she realized something. She wasn't doing this for recognition. She wasn't doing it for medals or headlines or speeches. She was doing it because it was right, because someone had to, because the soldiers on the ground deserved to know that when they called for help, someone would answer. And as long as she could fly, she would be that someone. The deployment ended 4 months later. Rook rotated back to Germany, back to the 81st, back to the routine of training and readiness. But something had shifted. The squadron treated her differently now. Not with deference exactly, but with respect. A quiet acknowledgement that she'd proven herself, that she'd earned her place. Captain Holloway, the F-16 pilot who dismissed the A-10 as obsolete, approached her one day after a briefing. "McGuire," he said, his tone less cocky than before. "I owe you an apology." Rook raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For what I said before, about the hog, about it being a relic." Holloway paused, his expression sheepish. "I was wrong. I saw some of the gun camera footage from your missions in Syria, what you did, the precision, the patience. I couldn't have done that in a Viper, not like that." Rook studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Apology accepted, but you should know the A-10 isn't better than the F-16. They're just different. Different missions, different strengths. The key is knowing which tool to use and when." Holloway smiled. "That's a pretty diplomatic answer." "I'm a pretty diplomatic person," Holloway laughed. "Fair enough, but seriously, McGuire, you've got my respect, and if you ever need a wingman, I'm happy to fly with you." Rook extended her hand. "I'll keep that in mind." They shook and Holloway walked away. Across the room, Major Cross watched the exchange, a slight smile on his face. Later, he pulled Rook aside. "You're changing minds, you know." Rook frowned. "I'm not trying to." "Maybe not, but you are. People are starting to see the A-10 differently, not as a relic but as a vital asset, and it's because of pilots like you." Rook shook her head. "It's not about me, it's about the mission." Cross smiled. "Maybe, but the mission needs people who believe in it, and you do. That's what makes the difference." Rook didn't argue, she just nodded and walked away. But as she left, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride exactly, but purpose. A sense that what she was doing mattered, not just to the soldiers on the ground, but to the institution itself. The A-10 had been written off 100 times, called obsolete, outdated, unnecessary, but it kept proving its worth, kept saving lives, kept coming home. And so would she. As long as there were missions to fly, as long as there were soldiers who needed help, Rook McGuire would be there. In the cockpit of an ugly, slow, beautiful A-10, doing what she was born to do, saving lives, one mission at a time. Years passed. Rook's career continued, marked not by headlines but by steady, competent service. She flew hundreds of sorties, supported dozens of operations, trained countless young pilots. She never sought the spotlight, never gave interviews, never wrote a memoir. But her legacy grew anyway, quietly. Inevitably, young pilots in flight school heard the story of the Koringal Run and dreamed of following in her footsteps. A-10 squadrons used her missions as case studies, analyzing her tactics, her decision-making, her ability to stay calm under pressure. And soldiers on the ground, the ones who'd called for help and heard her voice on the radio, never forgot. One day, Rook was called to the Pentagon for a briefing. She flew to Washington, checked into a hotel, and reported to the office of a three-star general she'd never met. The general, a stern-faced woman named Lawson, greeted her with a handshake and a smile. "Captain McGuire, thank you for coming," Rook nodded. "Ma'am," Lawson gestured to a chair, "please sit. I wanted to speak with you about something important." Rook sat, her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap. Lawson leaned back in her chair, studying her. "You're aware, I'm sure, that the A-10 program has been under scrutiny for years. Budget cuts, modernization efforts. There's a faction within the Air Force that wants to retire the fleet entirely." Rook's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am, I'm aware." "Well, there's another faction that wants to keep it, and they've asked me to lead the effort, to make the case for why the A-10 still matters, why it's still relevant, why it's still worth the investment." Lawson paused. "And I want you to help me." Rook blinked. "Ma'am, I want you to be the face of this campaign, to speak to Congress, to the media, to the public, to tell your story, to show people what the A-10 can do and why it's still needed." Rook shook her head slowly. "With all due respect, ma'am, I'm a pilot, not a spokesperson. I don't do speeches, I don't do press." Lawson's expression softened. "I understand, and I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, but the truth is people listen to pilots like you, people who have flown the mission, who have saved lives, who have proven the value of the A-10 in combat. Your story matters, Captain, and it could make the difference." Rook was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice low. "What about the other pilots? The ones who have done just as much, if not more?" "Why me?" Lawson smiled. "Because you're credible, because you're not flashy, because when you speak, people believe you, and because whether you like it or not, you've become a symbol of what the A-10 represents, of what it can do, of why it matters." Rook looked down at her hands. She thought about Voss, about 3rd Platoon, about the convoy in the Koringal and the desperate voice on the radio. She thought about all the soldiers she'd saved, all the missions she'd flown, all the times the A-10 had proven itself when everyone else had written it off. And she thought about the future, about the young pilots who would come after her, about the missions they would fly, about the lives they would save. If the A-10 disappeared, who would do that work? Who would fly low and slow into the fire to pull people out? She looked up at Lawson. "If I do this, I do it on my terms. No spin, no politics, just the truth." Lawson nodded. "That's all I'm asking for." Rook took a breath. "Then I'm in." The campaign began quietly. Rook testified before a congressional subcommittee, sitting at a long table in a wood-paneled room, facing a row of legislators who asked her questions about the A-10's capabilities, its limitations, its cost-effectiveness. She answered honestly, without embellishment, without drama. She told them about the Koringal Run, about the missions in Syria, about the soldiers who were alive because of close air support. She told them that the A-10 wasn't perfect, that it was old, that it needed upgrades, but that it did a job no other aircraft could do as well, and that until there was a better option, retiring it would be a mistake. The legislators listened. Some were skeptical, others were sympathetic, but all of them took her seriously, because she wasn't selling them a story, she was telling them the truth. After the hearing, a reporter from the Washington Post approached her in the hallway. "Captain McGuire, can I ask you a few questions?" Rook hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." The reporter pulled out a notebook. "You've become something of a folk hero in military circles. The pilot who saved 3rd Platoon, the face of the A-10 program. How does that feel?" Rook frowned. "I'm not a folk hero, I'm just a pilot. But you've done extraordinary things, flown extraordinary missions. Doesn't that make you special?" Rook looked at the reporter, her expression serious. "Every pilot who's ever flown close air support has done extraordinary things. Every crew chief who's ever turned a jet around in record time. Every medic who's ever saved a life under fire. I'm not special. I'm just one of thousands of people doing the job, and the job is what matters, not me." The reporter scribbled notes, then looked up. "One more question. If the A-10 is retired, what happens to missions like the one you flew in Koringal? Who does that work?" Rook's jaw tightened. "I don't know, and that's what scares me." The article ran a week later and it went viral, not because it was sensational, but because it was honest, because Rook's words carried weight, because she wasn't a politician or a lobbyist or a talking head. She was a pilot who'd been there, who'd done the work, who knew what was at stake. The response was overwhelming. Veterans groups rallied around her. Active duty soldiers shared the article on social media. Congress received thousands of emails from constituents urging them to save the A-10. And slowly the tide began to turn. The budget proposal was amended. Funding for the A-10 program was restored. Plans for retirement were shelved, at least for now. Rook didn't celebrate, she just went back to flying, back to the missions, back to the work. But she knew that something had changed, not just for the A-10, but for her. She'd stepped into the spotlight reluctantly and used it for something that mattered. And in doing so, she'd reminded people why they fought, why they served, why they believed, not for glory, not for recognition, but for each other. Rook's final deployment came 5 years later. She was a major now, a flight lead, responsible for a force-ship of A-10s supporting operations in Iraq. The mission was familiar: close air support, overwatch, protecting convoys and outposts and patrols. But the stakes felt different. This was her last tour, her last chance to fly combat missions, her last opportunity to do the work she loved. She didn't talk about it, didn't make a big deal out of it. She just flew, and flew well. One afternoon, her flight was tasked with supporting a joint special operations team that was conducting a raid on an ISIS stronghold in Mosul. The mission was high risk, high reward. Intelligence suggested a senior ISIS commander was holed up in a compound on the outskirts of the city, and the ground team was going in to capture or kill him. Rook's job was to provide top cover, to keep the skies clear, to be ready to strike if the team ran into trouble. The insertion went smoothly. The special operators moved quickly, breaching the compound, clearing rooms, securing the target. But then the situation changed. Enemy reinforcements arrived. Dozens of fighters armed with AK-47s and RPGs converging on the compound from multiple directions. The team leader, a Delta Force captain using the call sign Reaper 6, radioed for immediate air support. Rook responded instantly. "Reaper 6, Hatchet 1-1, I've got you. What do you need?" Reaper 6's voice was calm but urgent. "Hatchet, we've got enemy forces approaching from the north and east, approximately 40 combatants, danger close. We need you to break their advance before they overrun our position." Rook banked hard, descending toward the city, her eyes scanning the streets below. She could see the compound, the special operators taking cover inside, and the waves of enemy fighters moving toward them. "Reaper, Hatchet, I see them, coming in hot." She lined up her first run, targeting the northern group, and fired. The GAU-8 roared and the street erupted. Fighters dropped, vehicles exploded, the advance stalled. Rook pulled up, circled, and came around for another pass, this time targeting the eastern group. More cannon fire, more destruction. The enemy was scattering now, their formation broken, their morale shattered. Reaper 6 came back on the radio, relief evident in his voice. "Hatchet, Reaper, that's good hits. You've bought us time. We're moving to extract." Rook orbited overhead, watching the team move, providing cover as they loaded into their vehicles and raced out of the city. She didn't leave until they were clear, until they were safe, until the last enemy fighter had retreated. Only then did she turn for home. When she landed, Reaper 6 was waiting on the tarmac. He walked up to her as she climbed out of the cockpit, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, his expression serious. "Major McGuire, I wanted to thank you personally. You saved our asses today." Rook shook his hand. "Just doing my job, Captain," Reaper 6 smiled. "Maybe, but you did it damn well. You've got my respect and my gratitude." Rook nodded. "Get your team home safe. That's all the thanks I need." The deployment ended 2 months later. Rook returned to Germany, filed her final reports, and prepared for the next phase of her career. She was being promoted to lieutenant colonel, assigned to a staff position at Air Combat Command, where she would help shape doctrine and training for the next generation of A-10 pilots. It wasn't flying, but it was important, and she accepted it without complaint. On her last day at the 81st, the squadron held a small ceremony, nothing elaborate. Just a few words, a plaque, a round of applause. Major Cross, now a colonel, gave a short speech. Rook McGuire is the kind of pilot every squadron wants and every enemy fears. She's flown hundreds of combat missions, saved countless lives, and never once asked for recognition. She's a warrior, a leader, and a damn good stick. We're going to miss her. The squadron applauded. Rook stood at attention, her expression neutral, her hands clasped behind her back. When it was over, Cross approached her and handed her the plaque, "For distinguished service and for reminding us why we do this." Rook looked at the plaque, then at Cross. "Thank you, sir. It's been an honor," Cross smiled. "The honor's been ours." That evening, Rook walked out to the flight line one last time. The sun was setting, the sky turning gold and red, and the A-10s were lined up on the ramp, silent and waiting. She stopped in front of one, her hand resting on the fuselage, and looked up at the cockpit. She thought about all the missions, all the flights, all the lives saved. She thought about Voss and 3rd Platoon, about Reaper-6 and his team, about the soldiers she'd never met, the ones who were alive because she'd been there when it mattered. And she thought about the future, about the young pilots who would climb into these cockpits, who would fly these missions, who would carry on the tradition. She hoped they understood that flying the A-10 wasn't about glory. It was about service, about sacrifice, about being there when everything went wrong and doing what needed to be done. It was about the hog and the people it saved. Rook pulled her hand away, took one last look, and walked away. Behind her, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the A-10 stood in the twilight, silent and enduring, waiting for the next pilot to bring them to life. And somewhere in the darkness, another convoy would roll out. Another platoon would patrol. Another team would push into hostile territory. And when they called for help, an A-10 would answer, because that's what it did. Because that's what it would always do, until the day it couldn't. But that day wasn't today. And if Rook McGuire had anything to say about it, that day wouldn't come anytime soon. 10 years later, Rook stood at the podium of the Air Force Academy, addressing a class of cadets who would soon begin flight training. She was a colonel now, her uniform decorated with ribbons and badges earned over 2 decades of service. But she didn't talk about the medals. She talked about the missions. She told them about the Korangal Run, about the night the A-10 saved 3rd Platoon, about the decisions she'd made, the risks she'd taken, the responsibility she'd carried. She told them about the soldiers on the ground, the ones who depended on air support, who believed that when they called for help, someone would come. And she told them about the A-10, about its history, its legacy, its future. "This aircraft," she said, pointing to an image of the Warthog on the screen behind her, "has been called obsolete for 40 years. And yet it's still here, still flying, still saving lives. Why? Because it does a job that no other aircraft can do as well. Because it's tough, because it's reliable, because it doesn't quit, and neither do the people who fly it." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Some of you will fly fighters, some will fly bombers, some will fly transports, but a few of you will fly the A-10. And if you do, I want you to understand something. You're not just flying an aircraft. You're carrying on a tradition, a legacy, a promise. The promise that when someone calls for help, you'll be there, no matter what." The cadets listened in silence, their faces serious, their eyes fixed on her. When she finished, they stood and applauded, not because she told them a heroic story, but because she told them the truth. After the speech, a young cadet approached her, his expression earnest. "Colonel McGuire, I just wanted to say, your story inspired me to apply for A-10s. I want to do what you did, to make a difference." Rook looked at him, her expression softening. "What's your name, cadet?" "Jackson, ma'am." "Cadet First Class Jackson. Well, Jackson, if you make it to the A-10, remember this, it's not about you. It's not about glory or recognition. It's about the people you save, the missions you fly, the promise you keep. That's what matters, nothing else." Jackson nodded, his jaw set. "I won't forget, ma'am," Rook smiled. "Good, then you'll do just fine." She watched him walk away, and for a moment she saw herself in him, young, eager, ready to prove himself. And she hoped that he would find what she had found: purpose, meaning, a reason to fly. Because the A-10 needed pilots like him, pilots who believed, pilots who cared, pilots who would keep the promise alive. And as long as there were pilots like that, the hog would keep flying, keep fighting, keep saving lives. One mission at a time, until the very last.